friends, welcome to the United Lodge of Theosophists. This is our Sunday morning meeting here in Bethesda. We are the ULT for the Washington, D.C. area. There are lodges like this under many different banners around the world. And we come together here as students of an association of students where we all contribute in whatever way we can, whatever way we feel is appropriate for our own lives. There are no particular rules or requirements. There's no memberships. There are no dues. There are no officers. The only thing that unites us really as students is a similarity of teachings. We all study the great body of work that was put forward by the founders of the modern Theosophical movement, H.P. Blavatsky, William Q. Judge, and others. It is through their work that this lodge is sustained philosophically, and it is through the study of this work that we are sustained. The program of the lodge is a Sunday morning meeting, which typically consists of either a lecture or a roundtable discussion, followed in the afternoons on the first and third Sundays, a reading and roundtable discussion of The Ocean of Theosophy by William Q. Judge. The lodge platform changes from time to time. We have a quarterly program that goes out. The program can be found on the lodge website at www.ultdc.org, and you can find us in the real world at 4865 Cordell Avenue in Bethesda, Maryland. The format for the meeting today is a lecture. We'll have a short devotional reading and then a lecture followed by questions and answers. Today's topic is reincarnation, and next week is a special commemorative meeting where we acknowledge the founding of the ULT with a day of commemoration and a renewal of the bonds of fellowship that make the lodge what it is and make it effective in the world. Thank you.
Thou grievest for those that may not be lamented, whilst thy sentiments are those of the expounders of the letter of the law. Those who are wise in spiritual things grieve neither for the dead nor for the living. I myself never was not, nor thou, nor all the princes of the earth, nor shall we hereafter cease to be. As the Lord of this mortal frame experienceth therein infancy, youth, and old age, so in future incarnations will it meet the same. One who is confirmed in this belief is not disturbed by anything that may come to pass. The senses, moving toward their appropriate objects, are producers of heat and cold, pleasure and pain, which come and go, and are brief and changeable. These do thou endure, O son of Bharata. For the wise man, whom these disturb not, and to whom pain and pleasure are the same, is fitted for immortality. There is no existence for that which does not exist, nor is there any non-existence for what exists. By those who see the truth and look into the principles of things, the ultimate characteristic of those both is seen. Learn that he by whom all things were formed is incorruptible, and that no one is able to effect the destruction of it, which is inexhaustible. These finite bodies, which envelop the souls inhabiting them, are said to belong to him, the eternal, the indestructible, unprovable spirit, who is in the body. Wherefore, O Arjuna, resolve to fight.
Good morning, friends. Today's talk is on reincarnation. There are so many different slices and views and points of views and angles one can take at any discussion and at any talk. And when the students started slicing reincarnation and looking what it really is, it arrived to a concept of the concept, that any concept is not real. As a human beings, we box ourselves in core concepts, core ideas, through which communicate and explain those ideas. And some of the core concepts are life and death, time and space. And we all have a very predetermined idea of what that is. One of the key carryways through preparation for this talk the student had was exactly that, the emptiness of those concepts, and how to transcend the concepts to come to a realization what the ideas hidden behind them are. And with that we'll begin this talk, and I would like to invite another student. And we will read a sort of a folk story, one of those stories that being currently created on internet. In the past, those were the folk stories told person to person. Today, those are the stories created and distributed through internet. And we both found this story completely fascinating, and it will serve as a foundation for today's talk.
Would you like me to be the man who died?
Yes.
I was on my way home when I died. It was a car accident, nothing particularly remarkable, but fatal nonetheless. I left behind a wife and 2 children. It was a painless death. The EMTs tried their best to save me, but to no avail. My body was so utterly shattered that I was better off that way.
And that's when you met me.
What happened? Where am I?
You died. No point in mincing words.
There was a truck, and it was skidding.
Yeah?
So I died.
Yeah, but don't feel bad about it. Everyone dies. There was nothingness, just you and me.
And what is this place? Is this the afterlife?
More or less.
And are you God?
Yep.
My kids and my wife?
What about them?
Will they be all right?
That's what I like to see. You just died, and your main concern is for your family. That's good stuff right there. Don't worry. They'll be fine. Your kids will remember you as a perfect in every way. They didn't have time to grow contempt for you yet. Your wife will cry on the outside, but will be secretly relieved. To be fair, your marriage was failing apart. If it's any consolation, she'll feel very guilty for feeling relieved.
Oh. So what happens now? Do I go to heaven or hell?
Neither. You'll be reincarnated.
Ah, so the Hindus were right.
All religions are right in their own way. Walk with me.
Where are we going?
Nowhere in particular. It's just nice to walk while we talk.
So what's the point then? When I get reborn, I'll just be a blank slate, right? A baby. So all my experiences and everything I did in this life will not matter.
Not so. You have within you all the knowledge and experiences of all your past lives. You just don't remember them right now. Your soul is more magnificent, beautiful, and gigantic than you can possibly imagine. And human mind can only contain a tiny fraction of what you are. It's like striking your finger in a glass of water to see if it's hot or cold. You put a tiny part of yourself into the vessel, and when you bring it back out, you have gained all the experiences it had.
How many times have I been reincarnated then?
Oh, lots and lots. And into lots to different lives. This time around, you'll be Chinese peasant girl in 540 before Christ.
Wait, what? You're sending me back in time?
Well, I guess technically, time as you know it only exists in your mind. It's different where I come from.
Where you come from?
Oh, sure. I come from somewhere else. And there are others like me. I know you will want to know what it's like there, but honestly, you wouldn't understand.
Oh, but wait, if I get reincarnated to other places in time, I could have interacted with myself at some point.
Sure, happens all the time. And with both lives only aware of their own lifespan, you don't even know it's happening.
But then what is the point of it all?
Seriously? Seriously? You're asking me for the meaning of life? Isn't that a little stereotypical?
Under current circumstances, I believe it is a reasonable question.
The meaning of life, the reason, the whole universe is for you to mature.
You mean mankind? You want us to mature?
No, just you. This universe is just for you. With each new life, you grow and mature and become a larger and greater.
But just me. And what about everyone else?
There's no one else. In this universe, there's just you and me.
But all the people on Earth.
All you. Different incarnations of you.
Wait, so I'm everyone?
Now you're getting it.
I'm every human being who has ever lived. Or who will ever live. So I'm Abraham Lincoln.
You are John Wilkes Booth too?
I'm Hitler.
And the millions he killed?
I'm Jesus.
And everyone who followed? Every time you victimize someone, you're victimizing yourself. Every act of kindness you've done to yourself. Every happy and sad moment you've experienced by any human was or will be experienced by you.
But why? Why do all of this?
Because someday you will become like me, because that's what you are. We are of one.
Well, you mean that I'm a god?
No, not yet. You're a fetus. You are still growing. Once you've lived every human life throughout all time, you'll have grown enough to be born.
So this entire universe, it's just
an egg. Now it's time for you to move on to your next life. And so we begin. There are many questions that this small passage raised. The first question, what happens to us when we die? Another question, what is reincarnation? What actually in us that reincarnates? The third question, are there multiple people, lives, deaths, masters, or is it all one? And these are just the passages of the same. Is there one life of which we're all part and oneness of all? And what is our spiritual pilgrimage through that process? And so we'll begin try to answer some of these questions from the teachings of Madame Blavatsky. What happens to us when we die? This is what she wrote. At the solemn moment of death, every man, even when death is sudden, sees the whole of his past life, the one just lived, marshaled before him, in its minute details. For one short instant, the personal becomes one with the individual, an all-knowing ego. But this instant is enough to show to him the whole chain of causes which have been at work during his life. He sees and now understands himself as he is, unadorned by flattery or self-deception. He reads his life, remains as a spectator looking down into the arena he is quitting. He feels and knows the justice of all the suffering that has overtaken him. Now the question is, what happens to those who their entire life denied spiritual realm and believed only in the material and physical? Do they have the same revelation? Do they see in the same way all what happened to them and all what will happen? Will they have the passage, will they go through the passage that we just read? For me, that was always a very interesting question. And the student went and researched what Secret Doctrine has to say about that. Will the experience be equal, or will it reflect your level of development and what you experienced in life? And the answer was that if you have been blind in life, the death will not open your eyesight. You will remain blind. You will only see what you have seen, and your time between life and death will be very short before you incarnate again and experience only physical and material. In a way, you can say that we see only what vision we achieved during lifetime. There is no discoveries, no mysteries unveiled when we die. What we have achieved in spiritual growth and realm during life will be in a way clarified after death, but there will be no mysteries unveiled, as maybe some people hope that suddenly, if one does not believe in afterlife and the person dies and he says, well, maybe I'll know that there is afterlife. No, they still will remain as blind as they were and return back to the physical realm to go through another round of existences and experiences to some point to get there. That was very, very interesting discovery. The other discovery that death is not a punishment, as it's often portrayed in lots of other religious literature, that it is a punishment and ultimate point of decision. There is no ultimate point of decision, there is no ultimate point of judgment, and death is a friend. It's a friend that, in a way, relieves us from one stuck cycle and moves us to the next state. Of course, the question that often is posed, well, if I die and I reincarnate and I don't remember anything, that's not I. And that was the second research the student undertook. What reincarnates? What of us is immortal and permanent, and which part of us is just an illusion? And how to ensure that not your memories and experiences are past, but that really a higher triad that will survive. And once you get to the point of understanding that this is not important, that my experiences, my memories, my affections, my hate would live on, it is this well-being towards the oneness of life and the universe and the higher spiritual self that survives. And that self does not seek or desire life itself. I'll draw a picture of what survives. Now, there are different ways to portray who we are. This is one of the explanations that I found most relevant to this specific talk. There is a higher triad and there is a lower us. And we had several talks in describing what is lower, what is higher, and this is one of these concepts. There is nothing lower and there is really nothing higher. There is simply a different nature of different planes of us. And the one that we are fully aware of is the physical body. However, if we look at the physical body, this is something we can touch and as a concept realize this exists. But in reality, we are a vibrational body. We are vibration of joy, vibration of pain, vibration of doubt, and that is being experienced through that physical body. The second one that I like this term specifically, once again, there's lots of terminology and lots of concepts, that was a plastic soul. And when the student mentioned plastic soul, children would understand it's something made out of plastic. When Madame Blavatsky wrote of a plastic soul, there was no plastic. The plastic was meant to be flexible, fluid. So this is basically the astral body, a plastic soul, something that remains after the physical body deteriorates. But it's in no matter more permanent than the physical body. It's just of a different nature. Then there is a life principle itself, and this will be a very, very important concept going forward, speaking of life. As the student mentioned earlier, when we say there is life and there is death and then there is life again, it's really a misnomer. There is no life and there is no death. And when we speak of the life principle, that connects us to that eternal that actually is. And then there is the karma, you can call it even a body of desires, attachments, and all of the turmoil that happens in us that is part of Maya, and that's perceived by us as reality of life, what is a misconcept. And then there is a higher triad, the Atma, that connects us to the One, to the Source. Then there is Buddhi, and then there is Manas. The most complex part was the Manas, as it can be of a higher nature and it can be of more intellectual and a lower nature. And Manas is basically what carries our experiences. What survives after death is our higher triad. Now the Atma always existed, always exists. It's just the point of the source in all of us and what connects us to one. So in a way it carries completely nothing of a personal nature. Same with Buddhi. It was the Manas that was carrying that, I would not call it a personality, but that distinction of individuality. But as was mentioned before, once there is an attachment, do I survive? I does not survive. But the higher triad that carries I, carries a higher aspiration of I, does survive and goes on. It is a difficult concept to explain to someone who wants to live forever, because the answer to that person would be no, you don't live forever. But if you don't want to live forever, yes, you do live forever. So this is a little bit of a challenge to understand, but that's where the enlightenment comes. Once we can grasp it, then the whole fear of death, the whole grasp to life, grasp of pleasures, all is relieved. It's no longer there. Then there was an interesting concept of Sutratma, and the student would like to share that with you. It's a thread soul, like a pearl on the thread, on the thread human lives are strung, on that one thread. Manas has to become radiant for it to hang on the thread like a pearl. To close association with a terrestrial mind that cause radiance to be lost. So in a way, the Manas is what enables that thread to hang all of the life and to have that consistency of memory of those lives. But once the lower Manas is activated, there is no longer radiance in these pearls and you cannot see them. So there is a bit of a, I would say, the mystical explanation of if you can see the thread and the pearls of life strung on it. Once individual activates their Manas and their more of a mundane mind, those pearls no longer shine. They're still there, but they can be seen. Once the mind is of a higher nature and the higher Manas is activated, one can see all the pearls of those lives, and the whole continuity of lives comes in the picture. And Samudhi was the knowledge of past incarnations that are available only to arhats, as they can engage that higher mind, they are part of the Manas, that they can see the pearls on the string, where we all have the same pearls and the same strings, but our mind simply cannot grasp the entire view. We see only the pearl inside of which we are right now. The biggest question that was asked in the story, so what's the point of all this? Why? We have to die, then reincarnate again, then go through all of the joy and suffering, and then die again, and so forever and ever. And the answer was given that it is for us to mature, for us to grow, and that there is no us, there is just you. Of course, there are many different incarnations, but all of those incarnations are part of one. In a way, it is so much true that all the pain that we are causing or experiencing is experienced by all beings. And you can think of that pain as being universal and joy being universal, and we can connect to that. And at the same time, it is a concept that there are the separate beings who experience all of these feelings and who go through lives. It is one experience. And once we can emerge into that one experience and realize that it's a one life and one body that is experiencing all of this joy and pain and loss and victories, then we're starting to get connection and grasp of what life and death really is. That it is just one joint experience. And we are not maturing here as individuals, we are maturing here as an entire organism of that one life. And it is growing and it's expanding in its vision and its understanding in a way of itself, through all individualities that came to existence. And at the end, when we go through these incarnations, in a way they seem to be endless. But once the understanding of that oneness and that one life and the illusory nature of the attachments to any concepts, even attachments to the concept of life and death, are achieved, then that illusion stops. And what is beyond that illusion? That's the answer that the student does not have. This is from Madame Blavatsky. We are the reincarnating egos who will continue to incarnate until the great task which we undertook is completed. That task is the rising up of the whole of humanity to the highest possible stage of perfection on earth of this kind. So once again, she is not speaking of each individual perfection and growth, but of everyone's perfection and growth, and that everyone is not every, but one. That's the core concept that the student has derived from the purpose of the whole cycle and reincarnation. And that takes to the concept of one life. And that's what was pointed out, that this one life principle is probably one of the most important in the cycle of reincarnation. And there is an interesting comparison that, going through the readings, the student was able to derive, is that there is a concept of Father, Son, and a Holy Spirit. Then there is a spirit, life, and consciousness. This was just an interesting thought. When we look at Christianity, there is the concept of Trinity, of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And it is definitely symbolic. There are symbols behind each of these notions. There is a consciousness and life spirit, and there is Atma, Manas, and Buddhi. When the student looked at what the Father is, it is in a way the Atma. It is that one pointness that leads us to the source. It is the source of all. It is that what is and what is not. And it is in a way the birth of consciousness. That's from where the consciousness has been derived. When we look at the Son, it is the Son. It is material. It is both spirit and the human, and it is life. This is what comes from the Father, from the, in a way, what is and is not, into life, and becomes realized. And it is the life, and it's the life of each of us. And the closest to it is the Manas. It is the self-realized life. That we all have realization of our being, and we are exploring and understanding other beings, and through that universe is exploring and understanding itself. And then there is the Holy Spirit and the Spirit and the Buddhi. I will not go there. This is much more complex. But this is the interesting comparison that we see through lots of religions, that there is that one, there is realized life, materialized life, and the spirit that propels that life going forward. And here is some definitions that may help to understand this concept. The Atman is the one spirit, not belonging to anyone but all. And in a way, this is what the Father is. And consciousness as well, as it is shared. It does not belong to one being, one person, or even one animal. It is the shared consciousness of being. And there is in one of the talks, there was a mention of the noosphere, the consciousness of all humanity. There is Buddhi, is a sublimated experience of all the past. And Manas is the thinking power, the thinker, the man, the immortal man. The concept that strung all of these pieces together for the student on the existence and non-existence of life and death, and what is it all about, what is this spiritual pilgrimage of each human being through incarnations and time can be betrayed in one circle. And the student called it the pendulum of being. This is the pendulum of being, and this is the human soul, this one dot in the universe. It is connected to all and source of all. And there is this cycle, the circle of life and death, but neither one are permanent or real or consistent. There are certain numbers that we can assign to life. We know the human lifespan. It is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 70, 80, and so on. And it can last any duration of that. The years of death, we don't know. How? 1500. And average. Interesting. And once again, each human soul can be here, here, or at any span of that. Is it really important that the pendulum of one soul swings to 20 and then back to death? When you look at the grander scale, no. What is important is the cycle of the pilgrimage. It is just the pendulum of different states. It's no longer a defined permanent position that someone lived 40 years and died and then was dead for a period of time and then was born again. It's continuous process of that pilgrimage. And what is connecting it to all is that basically the higher triad that is here. It is permanent. It is attached to the source itself, and all of what happens to us is just a pendulum. Pendulum of experiences, pendulum of years, pendulum of memories, of feelings, but at the end it is what happens to the triad and the growth that it experiences in the cycle. And the cycle is also very representative because the circle is the one. And it is not one soul that is experiencing this cycle of the pilgrimage. It is one body that basically exists and goes through this cycle of death, birth, all of the experiences, and gained experience. So that lives within that one. And once the student looked at this cycle, really years became very irrelevant. Sometimes the pendulum can swing maybe to 10, but experience gained in that time will be worse over the experience of another soul that lived till 90. It really depends how condensed the experiences are and what was gained as a result of it, how much growth was gained. Or sometimes hundreds of lives can go back and forth, but the growth gained is smaller than the rice grain. So this is really about what we gain out of the years lived, and not how many years we live or how often we incarnate, where we incarnate, as who. There is a great curiosity. There's lots of mediums who are telling lives, but the whole desire to know the past lives is truly irrelevant, because we already know them. They are in us. Everything that we experienced, everything through what we grew is already in us, and when we are facing that new challenge, all of that comes to our help, and we are just have to be cognizant of that and use those tools that we've gained. This is what we need to know in life, not the experiences and the pictures and the paintings of the past lives, but the experiences and skills that we have gained through them. That probably stands at the core of what the student was trying to say. And to complete the talk, the student would like to read a passage from Hesse, Glass Bead Game, for which he won the Nobel Prize. And it truly summarizes what life and death is, and what is the meaning of it all at the end. This is just a short passage, but the student found absolutely remarkable the entire book, and it was definitely insightful into the teaching of Theosophy, and was very much reflecting teachings of Madame Blavatsky. So this is the ending of the book. It's about the Prince Dasa and his last battle. The enemy, unconcerned with such questions, put an end to reflection, discussion, hesitation. One day he struck. He staged a major raid which inveigled Dasa, along with a cavalry captain and his best troops, into rushing to the frontier. While they were on the way, Govinda's main force invaded the country, stormed the gates of Dasa's capital, and besieged the palace. As soon as Dasa heard, he returned back. He knew that his wife and his son were encircled in the palace, and that bloody battles were raging in the streets of the city. His heart pounded with fury and sorrow when he thought of his loved ones and the dangers that faced them. Now he was no longer reluctant and cautious commander. He burned with anguish and rage, urged his men homeward in wild haste, found the battle surging through the streets, cut his way through to the palace, confronted the enemy, and fought like a madman until at twilight on that bloody day he collapsed exhausted, bleeding from several wounds. When he recovered consciousness, he found himself a prisoner. The battle was lost. City and palace were in the hands of his enemies. Bound, he was taken before Govinda, who greeted him disdainfully and led him into one of the other rooms of the palace. It was the room with the carved and gilded walls where Dasa kept his scrolls. Here, sitting bolt upright on one of the rugs, stony-faced, was his wife Parvati. Armed guards stood behind her. Across her knees lay their son. Like a broken flower, that frail body lay dead, face gray, his garments soaked with blood. The woman did not turn when her husband was led in. She did not see him. She sat staring expressionlessly at the small corpse. But she seemed to Dasa strangely transformed. It took a while before he realized that her hair, which only a few days before he had seen raven black, was now everywhere shot through with gray. She seemed to have been sitting that way for a long time. The boy in her lap numbed, her face a mask. "Ravana," Dasa exclaimed. "Ravana, my child, my flower." He kneeled. His face fell forward upon the dead boy's head. As if in prayer, he kneeled before the mute woman and the child, mourning both, paying homage to both. He smelled the odor of blood and death, mingled with the fragrance of the aromatic pomade on the child's hair. With numb gaze, Parvati stared blankly down at the two of them. Someone touched his shoulder. It was one of Govinda's captains, who ordered him to stand up. The soldiers led him out. He had not addressed a word to Parvati, or she to him. Bound, he was placed on a wagon and taken to a dungeon in Govinda's capital. There his fetters were partly loosened. A soldier brought a jug of water and put it on the stone floor. The door was closed and barred, and he was left alone. A wound on his shoulder burned like fire. He groped for the water jug and moistened his hands and face. He wanted to drink, but forbore. This way he would die faster, he thought. How much longer would it take? How much longer? He longed for death, as his parched throat longed for water. Only death would still the torture in his heart. Only then would the picture of the mother with their dead son be erased. But in the midst of his agony, merciful weariness and weakness overcame him. He sank down and fell asleep. When he returned to consciousness after this brief slumber, he tried to rub his eyes but couldn't. Both hands were occupied, were holding something tightly. When he took heart and forced his eyes open, he saw that he was no longer surrounded by dungeon walls. Greenish light flowed bright and strong over leaves and moss. He blinked several times. The light struck him like a fierce through the noiseless blow. A twitch of horror, a shudder of fear, passed through the nape of his neck and down his spine. Once more he blinked, screwed up his face as if he were weeping, and opened his eyes wide. He was standing in the forest, holding in both hands a gourd full of water. At his feet the basin of a spring reflected browns and greens. Beyond the fern thicket he recalled stood the hut and the waiting yogi who had sent him to fetch water, and had laughed so strangely, and whom he had asked to teach him something about Maya. He had lost neither a battle nor a son. He had been neither a Raja nor a father. Rather, the yogi had granted his wish and taught him about Maya. Palace and garden, library and aviary, the cares of sovereignty and paternal love, war and jealousy, his love for Parvati and his violent suspicion of her, all had been nothing. No, not nothing. It had been Maya. Dasa stood there shuddered. Tears ran down his cheeks. His hands trembled, shaking the gourd he had just filled for the hermit. Water spilled over the rim onto his feet. He felt as if someone had just amputated one of his limbs, removed something from his head. Suddenly the long years he had lived, the treasures cherished, the delights enjoyed, the pangs suffered, the fears endured, the despair he had tasted to the brink of death, all this had been taken from him, extinguished, reduced to nothingness. And yet not to nothingness, for the memory was there. The images had remained with him. He still saw Parvati sitting tall and rigid, with her hair so suddenly grey, her son on her lap, as though she herself had killed him. The child lay there like the prey of some beast, his legs dangling limply across her knees. Oh, how swiftly and horribly, how cruelly and thoroughly had he taught about Maya. Everything had been deranged. Charged years had shrunk to moments. All that crowded reality had been a dream. Perhaps, too, he had dreamed all that had happened previously. The tales of Prince Dasa, of his life as a herdsman, his marriage, his vengeance upon Nala, his taking refuge with the hermit, all that had been pictures such as one might admire on carved palace frieze, where flowers, stars, birds, monkeys, and gods could be seen amid the foliage. And was what he was experiencing this moment, what he saw before his eyes, awakening from rulership and war and imprisonment, standing beside the spring, this gourd from which he had just spilled a little water, together with what he was now thinking about it all? Was not all this made of the same stuff? Was it not dream, illusion, Maya? And everything he would still experience in the future, would see with his eyes and feel with his hands up to the moment of his death, was it any different in substance, any different in kind? It was all a game and a sham, all foam and dream. It was Maya, the whole lovely and frightful, delicious and desperate kaleidoscope of life, with its sears, delights, its searing griefs. Dasa still stood numbed. Again the gourd shook in his hands, and its water spilled, wetting his toes and running into the ground. What ought he to do? Fill the bowl again, carry it back to the yogi, and be laughed at for all that he had suffered in his dream? That was not alluring. He let the gourd tilt, emptied it, and threw it into the moss. Then he sat down on the green bed and began to reflect seriously. He had had enough, and more than enough, of this dreaming, of this diabolic texture of experiences, joys, and suffering that crushed your heart and made your blood stand still, only to be suddenly revealed as Maya, so that you were nothing but a fool. He had had enough of everything. He no longer craved either wife or child, either a throne or victory or revenge, either happiness or cleverness, either power or virtue. He desired nothing but peace, nothing but an end of turmoil. He no longer wanted anything to check this endlessly turning wheel, to stop this endless spectacle, to extinguish it all. He wanted to find rest for himself and extinguish himself. That was what he had wanted when he hurled himself at the enemy in that last battle, slashing all about and being slashed at in return, giving wounds and receiving them until he collapsed. But what then? Then there was a brief pause of unconsciousness, a slumber or death, and immediately afterward you were awake again, had to admit the currents of life into your heart once more, and once more let the dreadful, lovely, terrible flood of pictures pour into your eyes endlessly, inescapably, until the next unconsciousness, until the next death. That was perhaps a pause, a moment of rest, a chance to catch your breath, but then it went on, and once again you were one of the thousand figures engaged in the wild, intoxicating, desperate dance of life. All there was no extinction. It went on forever. Unrest drove him to his feet once more. If there were no rest in this accursed round dance, if his one most acute desire could not be fulfilled, then he might just as well fill his gourd again and bring it to this old man who had sent him on this errand, although he did not really have any right to command over him. It was a service that he had asked of him. It was an assignment. He might just as well obey and carry it out. That was better than sitting here and pondering methods of self-destruction. Also, obeying and serving were better and far easier, seemlier and far more harmless than commanding and taking responsibility. That much he knew. Very well, Dasa, take the gourd, fill it carefully with water, and bring it to your master. When he reached the hut, the master received him with a strange look, slightly questioning, half compassionate, half amused, look of complicity. Such a look as an older boy may have for a younger one, whom he sees returning from a strenuous and somewhat shameful adventure, a test of courage that he has assigned to him. This herdsman prince, this poor fellow who had stumbled in here, was only coming back from the spring, where he had been for water, and had been gone no more than 15 minutes. But still, he was also coming from a dungeon and had lost a wife, a son, and principality, had completed human life, and had caught a glimpse of the revolving wheel. The chances were that this young man had already been wakened once or several times before, and had breathed a mouthful of reality, for otherwise he would not have come here and stayed so long. But now he seemed to have been properly awakened, and became ripe for setting out on the long journey. It would take a good many years just to teach this young man the proper posture and breathing. By this look alone, this look, which contained a trace of benevolent sympathy and the hint of a relationship that had come into being between them, the relationship between master and disciple, by this look alone the yogi accepted the disciple. This one look banished the fruitless thought from the disciple's head. It bound him in discipline and service. There is no more to be told about Dasa's life, for all the rest took place in the realm beyond pictures and stories. He never again left the forest. So that story describes the lives and passions and joys and losses of Prince Dasa, and how in reality it was just a trip to get water, and how at the end he realized what life and death is, and to the students the core revelation was in the two words in this passage was peace and service. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to attempt to answer.
I'm sure there are lots of questions. You talked about manas, I think Atma Buddhi manas, and then you said there are two aspects of manas. Is that part of manas that's perfected, that we've perfected in all these lives, that goes from life to life? Is that part of our individuality that continues on? And what happens to the other part? Does it stay back? Do we get to deal with that again?
That was very interesting, and I think we've touched several times on that higher and lower part of manas. The understanding that was gained from the readings I've done was that there is not necessarily, it's almost, let's see, that if to imagine manas, it's like yin and yang. There's really, you cannot separate lower and higher. It is one, but there are two aspects of it. And depending which aspect is activated, that's what the carrier of manas is perceiving. So you can be the sort of the perceiver that sees through the higher manas, or you can perceive world through your lower manas, and that will determine what you can see. That if the higher manas is activated, then you do see the pearl of lives, and you have not a different abilities, you simply see a much bigger picture of life and the world. But if just you're using your lower manas, then you see it in a more limited way, but it is one aspect. And that's something, the question that I also had, what survives? Does the lower manas does not survive, it just higher manas moves on? The understanding I have is that they both survive, but the lower manas is a vehicle utilized when we reincarnate. But in the higher states, it's like appendix. It's there, but it's really not of any function. And the more we can shift to the higher manas, the more is being active, because the lower manas can be active only in reincarnated state in certain circumstances, but it's actually not expanding, it's limiting us.
So that perception in this life, my perception, is based on what I've experienced in this life as well as all others before this life, positive or negative.
But that's something that was interesting once again. Is it the memories of events, or is it the experiences of events? And it is the experiences of events that matter, because they're the ones that give us skills. In which circumstances the skills were gained is really of less importance. Was it in the palace of the Raja or in the hut of the peasant? What mattered is that experience that the soul had to undertake, and the struggle to undertake to grow and expand, to get those skills and tools to apply in this life.
There's a quote, I think this was a quote, you said, Buddhi is sublimated experience of all the past. What does that mean, sublimated? And can you just say more about Buddhi as that?
Mm-hmm. It is almost that it is the, it's almost like the cleaning the egg from the shell. When all of the shell is gone and there is only an egg, that egg is the sublimated experience of all lives. The shell is the events. And with death, we shed those events, and they're no longer there, and they will never be there, and these people will never be there. But this condensed, sublimated experience of these interactions and those experiences are contained in Buddhi. How they're contained in it, that's the question I cannot answer, to be honest. But it is sort of the essence of all what we were, are, and will be. It has both the experiences and the potential for what we become.
Perhaps I can make a comment. In the Secret Doctrine, HPB, I think calls the Buddhi the casket of the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what exactly is the casket if it is going to convey the spiritual essence to the individuality? So it has to be of the same essence to this student's mind. So if that essence can be looked at from the other students' talk the other day as light or fire, then you have the light concentrated, coming through and being lighted on your manas. And it is that light that enables that individuality to perceive consecutive lives as continuity of consciousness. There is no really breakage, But as you expressed it, that the beads or the
Mhm.
pearls are there, but we only perceive the one that we're occupied in. The others are not available.
Mhm.
But once that continuity of consciousness is established, in other words, buddhi manas is yoked, then you remember all of your previous lives.
Mhm.
But for that to happen, you have to have become a perfected human being. From your explanation, the lower then becomes the server of
Mhm.
the higher.
Mhm.
It is no longer concerned with the little personality affairs, but its consciousness has been expanded. It understands, just like the story you read, that it is part of the all,
Mhm.
and it's willing to sacrifice the part for the benefit of the whole,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
that egg you
Mhm.
said.
But my lower wants to be in charge.
It's in charge most of the time.
Yeah.
With your passions and desires.
It's like the horse and the rider. There is a rider that needs the horse,
Yeah.
but the horse cannot start going all directions.
Has to be guided.
In regard to the wonderful story that you read at the beginning that you both did, a couple of questions. One, what is the relationship between the two parties speaking in that story? The one who says that they are God is talking to the other as though they're separate. And I'm wondering, are they really separate?
Mhm.
Because they seem so in the story. Like I'm come from someplace else, but then the person who just died is being sent back. So if you could speak to that, that's one part. And the other part is the relationship between incarnations. Like this was a really interesting new awareness for me that everyone around us are like our own incarnations. We are all one, in fact. And so my incarnations, quotes around the my, going from one of my lives to the next of my lives, is there considering the idea of the Sutratma, the thread soul, is there a distinct relationship between those pearls along that thread, those individual lives, and the lives of all of the others around us? I mean, ultimately, of course, we're all one, but is there some kind of process difference or some distinction between our own series of lives and another's series of lives? If you understand, I'm not sure if I'm articulating the question very well, but so those are my two.
I think I understood. On the first one, on what is there really? Okay.
The relationship it is quoted that who are you? Yes, I am God. But it is also quoted that we are one. The man who is acting as God, as the authoritative figure in the story, is simply a higher evolution of the consciousness of mankind. It is the next step of evolution.
So it's a qualitative difference, not quantitative. It's one quantity, but there are different qualities to that quantity. And on the sequencing of different lives, the best comparison that came to mind is it's like a rain. When there is a water, it's all one. It's in a cloud. It's the evaporation that collects, but then it falls. It's all the raindrops. Are they separate? Yes, they are very distinct raindrops, but you can push two raindrops and it will be one water. And once the water again from raindrops evaporates, it becomes again one body of water. So it is there is a certain sequence and a difference of each experience, but substantively it's the same water. That's
a very good simile. However, we are individuals, just like the raindrops or the light ray that comes out of the sun. The core is one, but the rays all disperse. And when we're here in incarnation, each human being is an individuality. And this is why it is very important the concept of oneness enter the consciousness, that our behavior from the core out represent moral and ethical consideration of all the others, but nevertheless we live that life on earth as an individual human being, even though it is everyone else's responsibility to help that one, and that one's responsibility to help everybody else. Nevertheless, the decisions made belong particularly to that individuality, because this is the learning arena where we experience and grow. When we are at rest, when the pendulum swings, we're amalgamating what we have learned to come back as a higher individuality in the next one. So in that respect, the beads or the pearls on that Sutratman uniquely belong to my experiences, even though I take a different name in each lifestyle, in each incarnation, and we all incarnate as groups. The individualities that come together have something to do with one another from life to life. So in that sense, yes, we are all one, and what this individuality does affects all the others. Nevertheless, we constitute one egg, and each individuality is a ray from that essence, from that core.
Yeah, something that when you think of oneness also, it's not only the esoterical oneness, but there is a saying, there's nothing new under the sun. When you think of somebody's experience, you probably had it too.
Yes, and it's recorded.
Yes.
The whole human family's experiences are recorded. And if you can access it, all of our answers are there. We just have to put the mind to it to solve it, but in a united way. All of us undertaking what we're good at to solve and contribute that ability. Julia, did you want to say?
Oh, I was going to say that there's a diagram that my mama used to draw that rather illustrates in another way this same thing we've been talking about. May I?
Yes.
This is later time. She used to draw this one. The I mean, here is the all. This is the total triune everything, and then there's Atma, and it has is Buddhi, and then there's Manas, which is just one, and then there's the Kama, and then there's the energy, and then there's, by golly, this life has finally achieved the density of the mineral kingdom now, by golly, and that's why life is in every mineral. Okay, well, here is some mineral that has had so much experience that it begins to have a bit of emotional feeling. So it's becoming individual in a slight way. And then here is one that's a piece of a plant, that is. And then here's the animal that's beginning to develop just a little bit of manas. So this is the animal. And by golly, we've got a human being who's got a physical body, and he's got a fine emotional field, he's got all this vital energy, and he's got some capacity to think, and when he's really quiet and not hurting or anything, he can actually activate a little bit of impersonal thought. But so when he does something really impersonal, this electrifies the whole field. And when someone else does it, this electrifies the whole field. And so this field gradually gets more and more available to human beings because of the activity of all the human beings. Though this one has not had the experience that this one has, but in meditation or in ecstasy or when he becomes a Mahatma, he is aware of all of it. I think that's sort of in
interesting.
Her diagram. And of course, this one has his Sutratmas and his many, many incarnations in which he is contributing his bit to the whole is perfect to start with, but the whole becomes more accessible to others because of the activity of all.
So it's almost a talk of its own.
Thank
the
you.
diagram. Thank you.
But it's
Interesting.
sloppy, but
No, it's very interesting. I like diagrams. Well, with this we'll conclude. Thank you.